Thanks for being with us. My name is John Price. I'm one of the pastors here at Covenant Community Church in Wexford, Pennsylvania. And with me is Darren Grove. Hi, Darren.
How you doing, John?
Good. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you.
He and his wife, Chris, are members here at Covenant Community, and Darren is the founder and CEO of Truefit. And so it's a tech company here in Pittsburgh, and we're going to have a little conversation about that today. Looking forward to it. And thank you all for being with us and to engage this idea of shalom, working for shalom, or shalom at work, and how that works itself out in our daily lives. So we've been doing a sermon series called Shalom in the Home.
It's been great.
And everywhere else. And we've been looking at several broad themes, and just so I don't forget all the ones that we've looked at the broad theme of shalom in Scripture, in the Bible. Then we've looked at kind of human relationships, marriage, parenting, family, friendships. We've looked at social themes. The transition from family to social was neighboring. What does it mean to love our neighbor, and how does that bring shalom? And then we've looked at leadership, government, economy, education, and now we're looking at work this week. And so you have a particular passion and joy around shalom in general as the theme in Scripture, and then in our context about work.
Long-time student of shalom, yes. I would say.
Yeah, so, when we first started the series, you got really excited and said, hey, I'd love to maybe do something around work, because we talked about that those were one of the themes that we'd be getting to later on in the series. So kind of talk to me, explain to us who are participating in this, what are some of the formative experiences that kind of helped shape your understanding of work and shalom?
Sure.
If you can give us some of that.
Sure. I was in my early 20s. It was right at the point in my life when I was figuring out how to take the faith that I learned from my parents and make it my own. Really trying to work on how does my faith apply to the things I was passionate about in areas like engineering and things I was studying in college. And so that was a real wrestling time. It is for a lot of young people, but it certainly was for me, trying to kind of make sense of how all of this fit together. And I remember my father-in-law at that time handed me a copy of the book Creation Regained by Al Wolters.
Great book, by the way.
It's a great book. And I was so grateful that Adam taught that in Sunday school last year. So that was terrific to kind of dive back in. It was very nostalgic for me, actually. But for me, Wolters was really the first introduction I had to the concept that the Bible is really, or the gospel really has 4 chapters to it, right? Creation, fall, redemption, restoration. And we talk a lot about that. But that was my first introduction. And what that did, understanding that creation is very cosmic in scope and it applies to everything, understanding that the fall affects everything, understanding that Christ came to redeem everything and that our job is to help restore it, work with him to restore it, that connected all the dots for me. And so it made sense of, for example, does God care about my work as an engineer, as a software developer? Does that matter? Does it have purpose? And so it really integrated my faith, and it expanded my thinking of what practicing Christian faith really means. And then soon after, early in my career, I had the opportunity to work for a local company here in Pittsburgh called Penn United Technologies. Penn United was founded by a gentleman named Carl Jones. Carl Jones was a pioneer in this thinking about faith and work integration. And so really early on, when I was young, I was watching these mature guys ask hard questions like, well, how does our faith inform the products we create? How does our faith inform the customers? How do we serve customers? How do we think about profit? All of those kind of key business things. And so really my understanding of how Christianity, biblical principles applied in a business context was really shaped and formed when I was at Penn United. And then when I started Truefit in 1997, I was 29 and kind of found myself, I didn't have all of the influences that I had at Penn United. And so I found some really amazing mentors, guys like Fred Federoff. A lot of people in Pittsburgh know who Fred was. He was the president of Alcoa. He was also a pioneer of connecting faith and business and thinking through that. And so really it was the influence of all of those men that kind of shaped me and shaped how Truefit began to form in its early days.
So something I just thought of as you were talking about that. So you obviously had these people, these men in your life who kind of gave you a vision of what it could look like, in some ways helped mentor you. How did you develop those relationships other than, working at Penn United? But how did you develop those relationships? And I'm thinking about others who are maybe in the shoes that you were, back when you were 29 and looking at that. How did you go about just even developing those relationships?
Well, it's funny. I mean, Penn United was obvious because they recruited me, and I was working there, and I mean that was really a God-directed part of my career. When I started Truefit, I was like, oh, I need constant influence, these people around me. I remember I just chased down Fred Federoff at a talk he was giving. There were two guys I wanted to meet. One was Reed Carpenter, who was the founder of the Pittsburgh Leadership Foundation. The other was Fred Federoff. And I remember I went to a talk, and I just, after the talk, just went to the podium, introduced myself, invited Fred to lunch, and that started a decade or more friendship that lasted all the way till he passed away. It was a very exciting decade of Christian engagement. Fred was one of those guys that never really retired, even though he wasn't president of Alcoa in those days. He just kept investing in the community. He just kept pouring back nonprofit boards, for-profit boards, all directed by his faith, his interest in making the world a better place. So I would to answer your question, I would just say, reach out, be tenacious. There's people out there who are interested in being mentors and mentoring younger people. Ask. That's all I did. There was no magic. He didn't know me at all. There wasn't a warm introduction. I just chased him down at a talk. So I did the same thing with Reed, by the way. I just chased him down.
So don't be afraid to ask.
That's right.
Right?
That's right. Yeah, don't be afraid to ask.
Good. So I think you maybe alluded to this a little bit. I think here at Covenant Community, we've done a fairly good job of laying a theological foundation for faith and work, for just broader vision of shalom and things like that. But and then more specifically in this series, we've kind of looked at shalom. But what are a couple of key passages or areas of theology that has been really influential for you in terms of how you have developed this passion, this kind of lens through which you see things? Can you kind of give us a little bit?
Absolutely. It's really important. I, early on did not have all of the biblical foundation that I needed in order to really put this into practice. And it really did develop over time. But a couple of years ago, I went back and kind of said, it's really important that these practices are grounded in Scripture. And so what are the scriptures that have informed our work at Truefit and informed me as a leader? And so let's think through the creation, fall, redemption, restoration piece again. And, the fascinating and exciting thing for me was that in the very first verse in Genesis, we meet God. He's working, he's creating things, he's a craftsman. That's fascinating. And then, as we hear the cultural mandate in Genesis 1:28, the command to fill the earth, we understand that as being a very broad concept that doesn't just mean, have a bunch of kids, which everybody
That's
at
right.
Covenant Community is really good at. but not
Having
just
babies is important.
not just that, but not just that, but also really bringing out all the potential of the creation, which does get into every area of work, mine included, and understanding that. But this idea that we're to fill the earth, to bring out the potential, and there's this one really curious story that a lot of people fly by in Genesis 2, and I first heard this from Andy Crouch, who explained the story where God asks Adam to name the animals is super interesting because, of course, God could have named the animals, but he doesn't. He says, Adam, I want you to name the animals, and Adam does. And so that's a demonstration of how God partners with us in the creative process. He doesn't do it all, even though he can. He has given us a charge, fill the earth, and he partners with us and relies on us to do it. So that's our assignment. And that applies in the work that we do. It applies in the work that everybody does. Earlier in the series, you mentioned the Neil Plantinga quote around shalom, which was super influential to me early on. The idea that the project is universal flourishing, that's really what we're called to do. That was an instance of what was seen in the garden, and that's what God wants us to restore today. So that's creation. Fall, in Genesis 3, we realize that it's not just people that are cursed. It's not just we that have a sin nature, but the entire creation is affected by sin. And so therefore the mission is not only filling now, it's fixing. So filling and fixing, we got to, fill what's missing, fix what's broken in the project. And again, that applies to the work that we do every day. In redemption, this was fascinating when I learned this because, as we think about redemption, the prophecies about Jesus, all are prophecies about shalom. So the prophecy that we hear at Christmas time, unto us a child is born. He'll be wonderful counselor, mighty God, everlasting Father, the Prince of Shalom. That word shalom there. And it says of the increase of his government and shalom, there will be no end. So this idea that when Jesus came, the increase of shalom is supposed to be the net result of that. And then, the passage that we often read at Easter, Isaiah 53, he was pierced for our transgressions. The punishment that brought us shalom was upon him. So in his death, in his birth and in his death, the point, his mission is to bring shalom. So that was kind of mind-blowing for me, really amazing. And then, in the New Testament, Colossians talks about
and just maybe before you get to that, I mean, it's a threefold shalom, right? It's shalom with God, right?
Right.
It's a shalom with one another, and then I think you're getting to this now. It's a shalom with all things, right?
Right.
It's a threefold shalom that we are welcomed into.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. So in Colossians, it talks about that, God's reconciling all things. And then in 2 Corinthians, it talks about the ministry of reconciliation and the fact that that's given to us, and it refers to us as God's ambassadors. Like our job is to have this ministry of reconciliation, which applies to the reconciliation of all things. I mean, Colossians says whether things in heaven or things on earth. So this is a mandate really that God partners with us in the redemptive and restorative process. And so, God partnering with us in creation, God partnering with us in redemption, the idea that it's a project of filling and fixing. At the end of the Bible, Jesus is sitting on the throne and he says, "Behold, I am making all things new." And that's understanding that that's a partnership really gave a lot of meaning and purpose to the work that we do. It means that all work is important and has dignity and has purpose. So that's kind of those are some of the key theological concepts and scriptures that have continued to inspire us.
Yeah, well, that's really helpful, and I think that helps to give just not even just more insight into you, but more insight into why this is important and how we think through this.
Absolutely.
So when you started Truefit, How did this theological foundation that you've kind of laid out for us now, and that was kind of, your eyes were being opened, so to speak, and you were kind of, seeing this newfound passion and joy around understanding Scripture in this way and understanding our role as those who have been redeemed by Christ and and are called to the work that He has called us to. How did this theological foundation influence the formation of this new company called Truefit?
Yeah. When we were thinking about launching Truefit, my background is software development, and so my career has been focused around creating software. It's what I did at Penn United. As we were thinking about launching Truefit and all that I had learned at Penn United, we started with the value system that we'll talk about in a minute. And we said, this is the type of company that we created. And explicit in that value system was the idea that we're grounded in a Christian worldview. So we were very explicit, and I talked to people who, I went around and talked to people who might be interested in starting it with me and said, this is what we stand for. And some of them said, awesome, I'm in. And some of them said, not for me, and that's okay. But we were explicit about our value system from the very beginning. So let's talk a little bit about just what Truefit does. So we have an orientation. Yeah. So we work with people who are creating new software products. So our real specialty in the software business is meeting people when they have an idea for a new product. Usually it's somebody who has an expertise in a particular domain, but they come to us with an idea. They don't necessarily have experience and know how to create software products. We work with a lot of software companies too, but a lot of the people we work with, this is the first time they're creating software. They see a need in the world. They understand that they need software and data and those experiences to help for their product. And so they partner with us, and we partner with them to create a new product, starting with an idea and ending with hopefully a commercially successful product. So we walk them step by step through the process of going from I have an idea, which is the point of highest risk for them, right? It's the scariest time, but exciting, and all the way to they've launched their product, they're successful, and they're a growing business. That's kind of really what our focus is. And so, our vision starts with the phrase "great software helps people thrive," and so right in there are all the ingredients that point to Shalom. We didn't actually articulate that on day one. We didn't have that on day one. That vision statement came much later, within the last couple of years as my team continued to work on this, which is also thematic. This is not something that you do once and you've arrived. You keep working on this. It's a journey.
So you kind of started out with a kind of just a broader vision of we want to be a company that's grounded in kind of Christian worldview. And as you've kind of gone along, you have kind of focused in on what that actually looks like and means in the workplace.
Yeah, I would say absolutely. It's been a journey. We've seen Truefit as more of a laboratory for how to unpack these principles and how to apply them and how to practice them. So we're very intentional, and the team is very intentional about that. We really do. We have built an amazing team of people who I would say are very committed to making the world a better place and client success. Not everybody has the same belief system. I should be explicit about that. It's not just like we hire only Christians, but we tend to attract people who have a greater purpose and want to create technology that makes the world better. So I'd say that is thematic. It's really filling and fixing, right? Creating new software products that need to be made to bring life, and being thoughtful about some of the not just dark purposes of technology, because there are those, but kind of unintended consequences. And really thinking, being responsible to think through how is this product going to be used, and how do we make sure that we think through that and make sure that those are, good purposes and not, purposes that don't create flourishing, for example.
So this may be slightly off the path, but I think is interesting. I just want to kind of take a minute here to hone in on this. But you mentioned that not everyone who works at Truefit is a Christian,
Right.
And I think that's interesting because I think sometimes people might think, well, a Christian company, is it just Christians who work there? But what I hear you saying is that a company like yours that is seeking to think Christianly
Right.
about how your particular business is done in the technology sphere is attractive for folks even who aren't Christians. Like they see this as a good and worthy cause to work for.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And of course, we have to deal with all of the misconceptions around, when people go to our website. You can read it right on our website. So if we're recruiting somebody, they go to our website, and very often we get questions like, well, what does that mean? Because the cultural connotations of being a Christian company are not necessarily all positive, right? So we very often have to kind of unpack that. I wrote a little paper at one point in time, what does it mean to be a Christian company? What does it not mean? So just think through that. And there's, the misconceptions range from, do you guys like pray before meetings or like, and we don't actually. Like I think if you experience Truefit, if you're working at Truefit and you didn't happen to be a Christian, I think you would not be uncomfortable because you were kind of bumping up against kind of religion more than you really wanted to. I don't think you'd have that experience. I think you would have it. The experience we try to create for people is that we're very intentional and responsible about the products that we create, and so we do want that to be inspirational for people of all faiths or people of no faith. So.
Good. Well, that's helpful.
And I do think it can be an example and a demonstration. So hopefully that's a winsome idea. Hopefully that, and I have had people ask me over the years, like, why do we do what we do? How did you, like remain calm in that meeting or whatever, like people ask me. And so there are opportunities for us to say, the reason we can do this is because these are our beliefs. And you do get an opportunity to share that from time to time, but we're not in people's faces about that. And we're more focused on just creating great products and doing it the right way and creating awesome teams.
They don't have to sign a statement of belief to work at Truefit.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Well, good. So I'd like to explore some of this as we've talked about using examples. So I think that's really where kind of the rubber meets the road for people, and how do they begin to kind of see for themselves and have a vision for where they are in terms of being able to hear examples of how you've seen this kind of play out in real time. So Truefit's stated vision, which you've already said, is great software helps people thrive. We are building excellent teams, impactful software, and successful business to be a catalyst for the common good. So can you give us some examples to help us understand exactly what that looks like?
Yeah. So break that vision down a little bit. There's kind of 4 parts to it, right? There's excellent teams, impactful software, successful businesses, so that people can thrive. That's kind of the way we look at it. And there's kind of a progression and a dependency. You need excellent teams to build impactful software so that businesses can be successful, so that people can thrive. And that's the way we think about it. If you think about teams for a minute, the real magic of Truefit, the real differentiator is our teams. And so that's really foundational for us. And work is dynamic. You're hiring new people, other people are taking on new roles, people are leaving. And so the work environment is very dynamic, and we are very intentional and focused on creating healthy teams and team health. So we're always on the lookout for where are there sticking points and where do we need to smooth things out? And we actually work with outside help consultants to come in and who are experts in team development, and sometimes that results in putting somebody in a different role because they're better. It's more suited to their gifting. So being aware of people's gifting, being aware of the best contribution they can make, and putting them in a position to be successful. All of that in a dynamic world where there's a lot of moving parts is really important to the team building aspect.
So let me ask you a question. How have you seen that play out in terms of employee retention? Because I think that, for business leaders, that'd be if I'm going to go through all this trouble, so to speak, have you seen that, play itself out in employee retention? Not that you shouldn't do it,
no,
regardless, but.
I would say definitely we've seen a direct influence between the whole picture, the vision, mission, values, the whole thing, sure. The culture that we're creating, and retention. So, the industry standards in technology are like you're with a company for like 1 to 3 years, and then you move on, you recycle. So if you looked at LinkedIn for people, you'd see like 1 to 3 years is very typical. I don't know what our average is, but I know that we have people that have been with us more than a decade. Mm-hmm. Lots of people that have been with us more than a decade. So I think there's definitely a relationship there, and I think it definitely plays out in terms of increased and better retention.
Good.
Yeah.
Sorry, didn't mean to get you off.
No. Good. No. So excellent teams, impactful software. This is really focused on software that makes the world a better place. And it comes from a motivation that we want to be responsible as creators, right? I mentioned we want to think through it. We want to understand how the product's going to be used. We actually take a very close look at every opportunity that comes to us, and we evaluate it on those merits. Like, do we think this product is going to make the world a better place? Is this the right time for this company to be making this product? Do they have the right resources in order to do it? So we score every deal that comes in for us, and we do make assessments about which ones we should say yes to, which ones we should say no to, and sometimes we do say wait, and you're not ready to work on this quite yet. You need to put some more work, and we give them homework assignments, and they go do them. So just a couple of examples of products that I would say don't make the world a better place. Early on in the world of mobile, we were pretty early to the game in mobile in the mid 2000s, and one of the apps that a lot of people wanted to make were dating apps, and if you think about it on the surface, you would think, okay, well, anything that helps build relationships would be a good thing, right? So, and then if you kind of drill into that and you think like, oh, well, we had people ask us, can I find people around me, using geolocation and things
right, like
that.
I'm sitting in a room and I can just pull it up and see if anybody's in that room with me, or just within a few
near the restaurant I'm
exactly,
at, or something like that. And so the dark side of that is those are stalking apps, right? Like you can use those for nefarious purposes, and you can there can be all kinds of unintended consequences. So we just decided at one point, like we don't do dating apps. We just said no, we're not going to. Like we had multiple apps.
We're swiping left on that.
Yeah.
Not right.
So that was an early example. We looked at a technology that was being created here locally. It was an interesting technology. It was a camera that mounted on the dash of your car that would watch other cars around you, and it could tell if those cars were speeding, and then it would electronically report speeders. And so think about that for a minute, right? It's like is the world a better place if we're spying on each other and turning each other in for speeding tickets? Like their business model was a revenue share of the ticket. So we're incentivizing people to spy on each other, and no, we're not going to work on that. And then recently, one of the big opportunities, there's tons of interesting work going on in ag tech, agricultural technology, but one of the places that's particularly lucrative is in the cannabis space. And so we would get these ag tech opportunities or inventions coming out of the universities, and And they would say, yes, and what we're really trying to do, our initial target market is cannabis. And this was fascinating because I'd say there's a pretty broad spectrum of opinion across Truefit in terms of your views on cannabis. And we actually ended up doing an all-employee survey to find out kind of what people's sentiments were on different deals. Like what were the definite no's for you? What were the things that were yeses, and what were the gray areas? And at the end of that, there were enough people at Truefit that were bothered by, we asked about medical versus recreational, like people were bothered by it enough that we said, we're not going to do any cannabis deals. So that's another area that we've just decided, more cannabis is not necessarily making the world a better place, and we don't want to. There's other examples, but those are kind of three that come to mind. On the positive side, we tend to do a lot of work in the health, wellness, and fitness space. So if you look at our website and some of the things we've worked on, there's definitely many projects that we've worked on that are helping people be healthier and helping people recover from surgery. So last year we launched we worked with two of the top shoulder surgeons in the country. These are guys who operate on like pitchers and quarterbacks, and we helped them create a remote physical therapy application. So instead of just going back to the physical therapist and doing your exercises there, they would give you a tablet and some sensors that you would wear and take it home and do your therapy at home, and the tablet would tell you how to do the exercise correctly, and the sensors would watch you, like measure how you were doing it. And all that data was really informative to the physical therapists. So that plays into the whole trend around home health. It's a better overall experience. It gathers really important data. And ultimately, it's going to improve outcomes for people who are having surgery. So it's going to help them recover faster. So that's an example of a product that
and really helpful during COVID since they couldn't go see their physical therapist.
Correct. Yeah. So there are definitely some technologies that play well into that trend, remote work and things like that. We also last year worked on kind of version 2 this year, but last year we launched a product in the cybersecurity space. Security and privacy is something that's actually very important, and we believe makes the world a better place. We created an application with a local Pittsburgh organization that works with companies all over the world to assess their readiness for a cyber attack. So what is the checklist that you would walk down to say, I'm ready for a cyber attack, I have good processes and practices in place, and I should feel safe. So helping people feel safe, secure, protected in a world where there's a lot of bad actors who are hacking and we had multiple customers this year who experienced ransomware attacks, which is basically somebody encrypts all your data and then charges you a fee to unencrypt, like a lot of money to unencrypt it, but they hold your data hostage basically. That's those are very dark uses of technology. So to the extent that we can work in the cyber security area and help that, we think that makes the world better. We did some interesting work in education on an application that helps teachers work with students that have special needs with a local company. That was fascinating, very large project, but that's being released into the schools right now. And then we also launched a product in the energy space last year with a local Pittsburgh startup company who had identified that the process of buying and selling property rights, like mineral rights, was fundamentally broken. So the way it used to work is energy companies would need to find these property rights that they wanted. They would use very manual processes to go hunt down who owns what. There's not a database of that anywhere. They would go knock on the doors of landowners. They would make offers, and the landowner had no way of knowing whether it was a good offer or not. They had no idea what their mineral rights were worth. So what does the market look like for that? And then there was also some other dark corners of that, like people were flipping property rights and some other things, taking advantage of people, really motivated by greed. And so this company here in Pittsburgh is launching a platform that makes all that information transparent. It makes it easy for energy companies to find who owns the mineral rights, and it gives an open marketplace to the landowner so that they know exactly what their mineral rights are worth. And so that's taking a process that was very broken for multiple reasons, very affected by sin, and making it transparent, making it open, and essentially redeeming it, as kind of we would say, that's a little instance of filling the earth with something new, a product that's new, and fixing a broken process that was broken in a whole bunch of different ways. So that's some of the things we don't do, and some of the things we really enjoy doing and are inspiring to us. So we've made a lot of progress as we continue to push on that. We haven't figured it all out yet, but that's some things that we've noticed, and that has been a journey over the last 24 years, really.
Yeah, no, I think that's really helpful, and those are some really kind of helpful examples and kind of exciting ones too that you shared with us. So we looked at kind of the vision, and there's obviously an overlap, but your values that you have at Truefit, that your stated values are principled, collaborative, empowering, and serving the common good. And as in some of those you've kind of already talked a little bit about through your vision, because obviously vision and values are connected.
For sure.
But how specifically, maybe giving maybe an example of a couple of how these have played out in life at Truefit.
Being principled is all about doing what is right, or really wrestling with the question, what is the right thing to do? That's actually not super common in business. I would say the predominant question that people pursue in business is, what's in my financial best interest? Right. And so that's motivated by greed and other things, but that's usually how decisions get made. That's not how we're making decisions. So I think we would fundamentally disagree with Milton Friedman, who said that the purpose of business is to increase shareholder value, right? And so it positions the shareholders as the only stakeholder in the business equation, and we would think of that more broadly, that there's multiple stakeholders and beneficiaries including customers and employees, and it's been introduced. Kind of triple bottom line thinking. So, people, profit, and planet, you want to think about all of those things. And that's, again, not common practice. Most people are financial best interest and shareholder value. Those are kind of key drivers, I would say. Collaborative, we really think of ourselves as all being on the same team. We're one team. We have very high levels of trust in the organization, and what that allows us to do, and we seek consensus in kind of how we make decisions.
Yeah, I mean, that example even that you gave in terms of surveying the company in terms of what are the things that you feel comfortable. I mean, I don't know how many companies would actually do that. I mean, you might have maybe a small board or a small group that might make those decisions, and then just say, okay, everybody else fall in line. But to get that collaborative sense,
we do.
Probably different than a lot of companies.
We do a lot of surveys, and we really do want very broad input and collaboration into what we're doing. And what that does is create a safe environment for us to actually disagree and have a diversity of ideas. So we're very big on of not just allowing it, but actually promoting it. I was in a meeting one time. We had a new employee and a longtime employee in the meeting, and we were debating some customer, what's the right thing to do for a particular customer. And I asked the new employee's opinion, and he said, and he gave, he could tell he wasn't really comfortable. He's the new guy giving his opinion, but meanwhile, he was observing this dynamic where we were really beating up and debating an issue. And after the meeting, he said, if I would have talked to my CEO the way that person talked to you, I'd have been fired. That's what he said. And so that's just a compare and contrast between, what typical power dynamics look like inside companies, the way people get culturally oriented and, their expectations set versus the way we do things differently with a value of collaboration. So empowerment, I think you did a good job, and I would point everybody to the talk that John did on leadership in Shalom, because you talked about servant leadership, and that's a big part of what we practice. We view everybody as a leader. In a lot of companies, there are leaders and there are non-leaders, or there are followers. There's people who, and usually the definition is, does anybody report to you, right? Like, do you have a team? Do people report to you? And it's a hierarchy. And we don't think of it as a hierarchy, and we don't think of leadership in terms of people, you being responsible. Leadership is about influence for us. So everybody has influence, so everybody's a leader. And that changes your mindset around leadership and input and collaboration and consensus and all those topics. And when you add the ingredient that leaders are fundamentally there to serve others, it really does change the typical dynamics in business, because the typical dynamics are you do what you're told. Like, I'm the leader, you're on my team, and I'm going to tell you what to do, and you're going to do it. Very different to say, my job as a leader is to help you be successful and do your job and serve our clients better. It's a completely different orientation. It's very uncommon, actually, in business. It's something we really strive to do. As leaders, we want to serve and make sure that other people are set up for success. That's really kind of how we think about that.
Good. Yeah, that's really helpful. And then, obviously, serving the common good, we've talked a lot about that in terms of how that plays out.
Yeah, so just one quick example on that front. We really build relationships with a whole person, not just their, the task they do or the project that they're on, or things like that. We want to get to know them. There are a lot of people at Truefit who have social relationships that extend outside the workplace, and we want to be friends, and we're colleagues in a very holistic sense. And we value family, and we want to make sure that people can be successful at work and all of life. So what that leads us to do is implement things like flexible schedules. So long before there were, we were required to work at home, people had flexibility. They could work at home part of the time. They could work in the office part of the time. They can flex their schedule. So we have people that, like to start at 10 and work late. Then we have people who come in at 6 and leave at 3. You really have a lot of flexibility. If you need to leave to take care of one of your kids, you do that. You make up the time, or usually people just make up the time. So, that's we see all that as it's not just big ways of contributing to the common good. It's like in the details too.
And it's not just outside of your company; it's also inside as well.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, this has all been really good and helpful, and I think it's good to hear of all these good examples and how things have played out how you maybe hoped and dreamed. But unfortunately, we live in a fallen world. Unfortunately, and we don't always experience the fullness of shalom in the ways that we hope to, even if we have the best plan and the best intentions and all these things. And we won't see that, obviously, until the kingdom comes in its fullness. So what are a couple of aspects of the work that Truefit does that you that haven't lived up to kind of the ideals and values that you've set?
Yeah, and there's a lot, unfortunately. Like
I won't make a list of all.
Like I said, this is really a journey. And if I look back over 24 years, I can see that we've gone from areas of real immaturity in some things and we've stubbed our toe a lot along the way. So let me just say, we don't practice this perfectly. I wouldn't, like I said, we view Truefit as a laboratory, so you should be able to look in and kind of see examples, but we haven't got it all figured out, and I just want to be super clear about that. And I don't think there's any arriving. Like, I don't really think you ever arrive. So I think this is a constant process of thinking about how you can do better, a constant process of iterating around examining what you're doing, learning, and figuring out what to do better. So that means that you don't have to figure it all out before you start. Like, just get started practicing shalom. Just get started on some of these things and then iterate and then get better and better and better. So one of the specific examples I would say is, I mentioned earlier that we are selective about the work that we take. There's a lot of nuance to that. Are people, ready to spend their money on this idea? Is this a product that makes the world a better place? And to the extent that we focus on the ideas we're most excited about, or the ideas that we think will make the world a better place, it does limit the playing field. So one of the wrestling matches is, how do we make sure we have enough work for everybody to do, but the right work? And that's a tension, and that's a debate that happens often. Should we take this deal? Should we not take this deal? Is this deal ready? But we need it. Sometimes we need it.
Right.
And so, and then how do we be as responsible as we can to move forward? And we've made decisions at time when we've needed deals a lot, but we say, this is not something that we should be helping with, or we can help with, because of lots of reasons. But so that tension, I'd say we wrestle with that a lot. Sometimes I would say, are challenged to compromise our process because people want to save money. I don't think it actually saves them money. So just as a quick example of that, people will come to us and we spell out a process. I mentioned that, when you have an idea, you're at the point of highest risk, right? So we help you. Our process helps you reduce risk, and risk is caused by uncertainty, and the antidote for uncertainty is insight. So we do a lot of upfront research to challenge assumptions, learn about what users want, for example, or what value proposition would be most successful in the market of a particular product. And we gain insight from people who we're hoping later on to sell the product to, right? And so we do that, but sometimes people look at it and so that's, if you do the process right, it's a pretty expensive process to do that upfront, figure out what the right thing to build is. We call that the discover stage. But it's all about figuring out the right thing to build, and it's all about reducing risk, because it's very expensive to, once you build it, to change it. So we want to get that right up front. But a lot of people look at it and say, well, I can't spend this much money, I can only spend this much money, and therefore we make more assumptions, and we do more guessing, and we don't get as many insights as we need. And so we're constantly challenged that way. There's two versions of that. One is, I just don't have the money to do all the right work. The other is, I believe I'm the expert in my domain, and I don't need insights from other people. Right. We're going to work on expert opinion. So both of those things have risks associated with them, and sometimes we have to compromise our process to fit the client or fit the budget, the available budget. And that's always a cringy piece of it. It's like, can you do this for half as much? Mm-hmm. Not like we'd like to, not well. Right. Here's the problems, but your call. So just one other quick example. This has been a challenge all along, but I would say we'd love to have more resources to invest in diversity. And so what's happened over time is, because our customers expect us to be experts. What that has, and early on in our life, we hired a lot. We did a lot of internships, and we brought a lot of kids right out of college, and we had this kind of training ground for people. And over time, what's happened is we've been able to do less and less of that, because people need to hit the ground running. People expect us to be experts, and you have to be creating value very early on. And so what that's done is it's cut off this part of the world for us that is like, how do we nurture and train up people into new software development? And that's particularly true when you're trying to create a more diverse workforce, because like engineering and software tends to not have a lot of natural diversity to it. So if we wanted to affect that, we'd have to put together something like an apprenticeship program. And we just don't have the resources to do that right now. But part of the dream is that we would be able to invite, multi-ethnic community to learn how to code, And there's lots of code camps out there and cool things. And people like Academy Pittsburgh, who are doing a great job with diversity, that are models here locally, who we would love to be able to do more of that. We really value, and right in our values, it talks about, we value diversity of ideas. And so we would love to be able to do more of that, because we don't have the diversity that we want, but we're kind of stuck. So anyway, there's just
Good.
a few examples.
No, I think that's helpful, and I think that can help others see that maybe where they are is not all that uncommon, and that even if we're striving for this ideal of shalom, that there's there is that frustration that that Scripture reminds us of, that
Yeah, a lot of natural hurdles
Right.
that you experience, week in and week out,
Right.
literally.
Yeah. So this has been, I think, really, really helpful and good. I'd like us to kind of maybe end our time on how you use creation, fall, redemption, and restoration, that theme in business, like evaluating business. I mean, when we were preparing this, that was one of the things I found really interesting. I think I even said to you, I said, I think intuitively, as leadership in our church, we think that way, but actually to use this as kind of a model, or a plan almost, to see how do you evaluate things, I think is really insightful and helpful. And so maybe if you could just talk a little bit more about that as we end, and then maybe how others could use this in their context as well.
Yeah, so hopefully this kind of brings everything together. Thinking about creation, we ask ourselves the question, what is good software? What products should we create? That's a creation question. And I think you can ask it at a product level. I think you can also ask it at an organizational level, at a business level. So what does good business look like? How do you balance people, profit, and planet as you're thinking about surplus? And realize that we're also we're creating and we're living in systems. So thinking about the systems associated with that, what new systems or processes need to be created? What new systems and processes are needed, and what should we create? So you can kind of fill in the blank on that, and just take software out and put in what you do. So what is good, teaching? What is good sales? What is good, whatever work you're doing? Just put it in there and ask yourself, what does that look like if you think about the way it ought to be, right? So that's creation is about the fun part of creating things that are new. The fall, and so that's filling, right? Fixing is being sensitive and aware of where sin is impacting. What are the dark corners? What's broken? Sometimes that's easy to spot. Sometimes you have to dig into the details. But we think about how does sin distort software products?
Because even something that initially looks good could actually...
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, like the dating app thing.
Right.
Yeah. So how might we think through and avoid the potential downsides of using technology? But again, fill in the blank. How do we avoid the potential downsides of, how does sin affect construction? How does sin affect mail delivery? So how does, and then so think about that at a product level, at a business level. How does sin distort business? How might we correct that? And then fill in the blank for your organization, whether you work for a school or the government or a business, a church, everywhere. Yeah. How is sin affecting you? How can you push back the darkness and fix things? Redemption, one of the passages I didn't mention earlier, but has been very informative, is the whole chapter of Ephesians 1. So Ephesians 1 says that the power that raised Christ from the dead is available to us. Mm-hmm. So because of that power, because you have power in your position, what does that enable you to do? You're not a victim. You're empowered by the Holy Spirit and by the power that raised Christ from the dead. So as a believer, you have this like extra power source. That's super cool. And then in the world of restoration, we ask how do we work against the negative forces in software? what injustice exists, kind of tackling this whole, and that exists at both an impersonal level, it exists at a systems level. How do we identify where injustice exists and fight for justice? How do we right the wrongs?
I think that was interesting because you mentioned in the creation, how do we create new systems? And then restoration, there's also what systems are broken and need to be restored.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. So really it's about thinking about the influence that you can bring to your work. And that's another thing I would just emphasize is, a lot of people say, well, it's easy for you. You're the founder of the company, you're the CEO, but we see people doing this at all levels. And so I think it's really important to realize that you don't have to be a CEO or a founder in order to have influence and do this wherever God's placed you. This is about blooming where you're planted. This is about looking around and making small, micro adjustments to bring a little more shalom to the places that God has you most of the time, which for many of us is our workplace. So
I think it's a really good way to end, is a reminder that, I think in some ways we kind of think of this and we think, well, if I had the power, so to speak, or
right.
the position, then I could do this, right? But to your point, there's ways in which no matter where we are, whether we're the laborer on the construction site or whether we're the CEO of a company, there are ways in which we can implement these things into the way that we do our work that impact not just ourselves but those around us, and also bring the ability or the sphere of influence that we have to see that come to fruition. So
absolutely.
So thanks for your time, Darren. This has been great.
This is fun.
I've really enjoyed it, and thanks for joining us online or however you're viewing this. And
I'll just add that this is hopefully an ongoing conversation. So if you found pieces of this valuable, you might have found pieces of this that raise a question for you. I would love to talk to you about those things. I would love to continue the conversation, engage in examples from your workplace. And this is a project that we all do together as a church. Absolutely. So I would say if I can be helpful, this is a topic that I love to talk about, and anything I've learned, I'd love to pass on.
Yeah, and we'll be adding more resources as well, besides this video that people can interact with and use to continue to grow in this area. So thanks
awesome.
Again.
You bet. Thanks.
All right. Thanks for joining us. Bye.